The cafeteria at Roosevelt Middle School buzzed with the usual chaos of 7th grade lunch period. Students clustered around familiar tables, trading sandwiches and gossip in equal measure. But in the far corner, near the emergency exit that led to the gymnasium, something unusual was happening. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 12-year-old Marcus Thompson sat alone at a table meant for 8, methodically unpacking what appeared to be the most elaborate lunch anyone had ever seen. While other kids pulled out basic sandwiches and juice boxes, Marcus had spread before him a feast that looked like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant. There were perfectly arranged sushi rolls, gourmet wraps cut into precise triangles, exotic fruits carved into decorative shapes, and what appeared to be homemade desserts that could have come from a professional bakery. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Just 3 weeks ago, Marcus had been eating the same standard peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as everyone else, hurrying through his meal while trying to avoid the attention of Tyler Rodriguez and his crew. Tyler, with his perfectly styled hair and expensive sneakers, had made Marcus's life miserable since the beginning of the school year. Every day brought a new humiliation, books knocked from hands, lunch money demanded, or worse, the kind of social isolation that made Marcus feel invisible even in a crowded room. But something had shifted in Marcus during those lonely September evenings. While other kids were playing video games or scrolling through social media, Marcus had been watching cooking videos on YouTube, learning techniques that professional chefs spent years mastering. His grandmother, who had moved in with his family after his grandfather passed away, had been his willing accomplice and teacher. She had grown up in her family's restaurant and possessed culinary secrets that had been passed down through generations. The first day Marcus brought his elevated lunch, a few students had glanced over with mild curiosity. By the second day, the whispers had started. By the third day, even teachers were stopping by his table during their lunch patrol, unable to hide their amazement at the artistry displayed in his meal presentation. What Marcus hadn't anticipated was the effect his culinary showcase would have on Tyler Rodriguez and his friends, Jake Morrison, Alex Chin, and Danny Walsh. These 4 had ruled the 7th grade with an iron fist, determining who was cool and who wasn't, who belonged and who should be ignored. They had built their reputation on being the toughest, the most athletic, and the most socially connected students in their grade. Tyler had been the first to notice the change in Marcus's lunch routine. Initially, he had planned to use it as another opportunity for mockery. He had approached Marcus's table with his usual swagger, expecting to find some new ammunition for embarrassment. Instead, he found himself staring at food that looked better than anything he had ever seen in the fancy restaurants his parents took him to on special occasions. The sushi rolls were perfect cylinders, each piece identical to the next. The wraps were secured with what appeared to be custom-made picks topped with tiny decorative vegetables. There were small containers of sauces and colors Tyler didn't even recognize, and everything was arranged on a wooden board that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread rather than a middle school cafeteria. Jake Morrison, who prided himself on his knowledge of expensive things, had never seen a lunch presentation like this outside of his family's country club. Alex Chun, whose parents owned a successful restaurant chain, recognized techniques and ingredients that even his family's professional chefs didn't always execute so flawlessly. Danny Walsh, who usually showed interest only in sports and video games, found himself genuinely curious about how someone their age could create something so impressive. The 4 bullies had approached Marcus's table that first Tuesday with their usual intentions, but found themselves speechless. Marcus, who had been bracing himself for the daily harassment, looked up to find Tyler Rodriguez staring at his lunch with an expression that was completely unfamiliar, genuine interest mixed with something that might have been respect. Silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Other students in the cafeteria had noticed the unusual interaction and were watching with the kind of fascination typically reserved for potential fights or major drama. Everyone knew the dynamic between Tyler's group and Marcus. Everyone expected this encounter to end with Marcus's elaborate lunch scattered across the floor, and the quiet kid retreating to the bathroom to hide his tears. Instead, Tyler Rodriguez did something that surprised everyone in the cafeteria, including himself. He asked a question. "Where did you learn to make that?" The words came out before Tyler could stop them. His friends looked at him with confusion, and Marcus looked up with the startled expression of someone who had been expecting an insult, but received genuine curiosity instead. Marcus had spent weeks preparing for this moment without realizing it. He had practiced explaining his techniques to his grandmother, had rehearsed the stories behind each dish, and had even prepared responses to potential questions about ingredients and preparation methods. But he had never imagined that Tyler Rodriguez would be the one asking. "My grandmother taught me," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "She used to work in her family's restaurant." Tyler nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the artistic arrangement of food. Jake Morrison leaned in closer, drawn by what appeared to be handmade pasta salad with ingredients he couldn't identify. Alex Chun was staring at the sushi with the appreciation of someone who understood the skill required to create such a perfect presentation. Danny Walsh seemed fascinated by the elaborate dessert that looked like a miniature work of art. The conversation that followed was unlike anything that had ever happened between these 5 students. Tyler found himself asking about cooking techniques with the same intensity he usually reserved for discussing basketball strategies. Jake wanted to know about the exotic ingredients and where Marcus had found them. Alex was curious about the cultural origins of the various dishes, recognizing influences from multiple cuisines seamlessly blended together. Danny, surprisingly, was most interested in the time management and planning required to create such elaborate meals on a daily basis. Marcus discovered that Tyler's aggressive exterior hid a genuine curiosity about creative pursuits that he had never been able to explore without risking his carefully constructed image. Jake's obsession with expensive things stemmed from a real appreciation for craftsmanship and quality that extended far beyond material possessions. Alex's competitive nature was actually rooted in a deep respect for skill and mastery in any field. Danny's seemingly simple interests masked a complex understanding of strategy and planning that extended far beyond sports. As the lunch period progressed, something unprecedented happened. Tyler Rodriguez and his friends didn't leave Marcus's table. Instead, they pulled up chairs and continued asking questions. Other students in the cafeteria watched in amazement as the most feared group in 7th grade engaged in what appeared to be a genuine, enthusiastic conversation with the kid they had been tormenting for weeks. Marcus found himself explaining the difference between various types of rice used in sushi preparation, demonstrating the proper way to use chopsticks, and describing the fermentation process that created the unique flavors in some of his grandmother's traditional recipes. He talked about the importance of knife skills, the art of food presentation, and the cultural significance of sharing meals in different traditions around the world. What started as Tyler's impulsive question had evolved into an impromptu cooking lesson that captivated not only the 4 former bullies, but also several other students who had gradually moved closer to listen. Marcus, who had spent months feeling invisible and worthless, suddenly found himself the center of positive attention for the first time since starting middle school. The bell signaling the end of lunch period seemed to ring too soon. As students began clearing their tables and heading to their next classes, Tyler Rodriguez did something that would have been unimaginable just 1 hour earlier. He asked Marcus if he would be willing to teach him how to make sushi. The request hung in the air like a challenge to everything that had defined their relationship up to that point. Marcus looked at Tyler with surprise, uncertainty, and the faintest glimmer of hope. The other 3 boys, Jake, Alex, and Danny waited for Marcus's response with an interest that surprised them all. Marcus nodded slowly, still not quite believing what was happening. They agreed to meet after school in the home economics classroom, where Marcus could demonstrate some basic techniques using the school's equipment. It was a small step, but it represented a complete reversal of the power dynamic that had governed their interactions for months. As the 5 boys headed to their respective afternoon classes, the cafeteria buzzed with speculation about what had just occurred. Students who had witnessed the interaction struggled to process what they had seen. Teachers who had noticed the unusual gathering wondered if they should be concerned about potential conflict or impressed by what appeared to be genuine academic interest. Marcus walked to his next class with a feeling he hadn't experienced in months, anticipation rather than dread about tomorrow's lunch period. He had discovered something powerful about the universal language of food and the way shared interests could bridge even the deepest social divides. Tyler Rodriguez found himself thinking about knife techniques and rice preparation instead of basketball plays. For the first time in his middle school career, he was genuinely excited about learning something that had nothing to do with sports or social status. He had stumbled upon a passion he never knew existed, and it had come from the most unexpected source imaginable. The other 3 boys were equally affected by the encounter. Jake Morrison started researching high-end kitchen equipment online, fascinated by the tools that could create such precise results. Alex Chung began thinking about the business aspects of food preparation and the cultural exchange that happened through cuisine. Danny Walsh found himself planning the logistics of collaborative cooking projects with the same strategic thinking he applied to video game campaigns. None of them realized it yet, but Marcus Thompson's smart move, the decision to channel his pain into something creative and impressive, had set in motion a series of events that would transform not only his own middle school experience but also the lives of the 4 boys who had made his life miserable. The afternoon classes passed in a blur of anticipation and nervous energy. Marcus spent his study hall period sketching out simple sushi recipes that would be appropriate for beginners, while Tyler found himself doodling kitchen layouts in the margins of his math homework. The meeting after school would be the first real test of whether this unexpected connection could survive outside the unique environment of the cafeteria encounter. As the final bell rang and students began their exodus toward buses and parent pickup lines, 5 boys who had started the day as bitter enemies found themselves walking toward the home economics classroom with a shared sense of curiosity and possibility that none of them had anticipated. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The empty hallways of Roosevelt Middle School echoed with their footsteps as they made their way toward what would become the first of many collaborative cooking sessions that would change everything they thought they knew about friendship, respect, and the power of sharing something you're genuinely passionate about with others. The home economics classroom at Roosevelt Middle School felt different after hours. Without the usual buzz of students and the structured chaos of regular class periods, the space took on an almost sacred quality. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting long shadows across the stainless steel workstations and creating an atmosphere that was both intimate and slightly intimidating. Marcus arrived first, carrying a cloth bag filled with ingredients and tools his grandmother had helped him select. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged everything on the central workstation, not from fear of cooking, which had become as natural to him as breathing, but from the uncertainty of what would happen when Tyler and his friends arrived. The dynamic that had shifted so dramatically during lunch felt fragile, like something that could shatter with the wrong word or gesture. Tyler Rodriguez appeared in the doorway exactly 3 minutes after the agreed-upon time, a punctuality that surprised Marcus. Behind him came Jake Morrison, Alex Chin, and Danny Walsh. each carrying expressions of curiosity, mixed with the kind of social awkwardness that came from stepping outside their established roles. They had never been in this classroom together, had never shared space where Tyler wasn't the undisputed leader, and Marcus wasn't the obvious target. The silence stretched for several heartbeats as the 5 boys assessed this new territory. Tyler broke it by walking directly to the workstation where Marcus had set up, his usual swagger replaced by something more tentative. The others followed, forming a loose semicircle around the ingredients Marcus had arranged with careful precision. "So," Tyler said, his voice lacking its usual commanding tone, "where do we start?" Marcus looked up from the rice he had been examining, and in that moment, he made a decision that would prove more transformative than any of them could have imagined. Instead of launching immediately into cooking instructions, he began to tell them the real story behind his culinary journey. 3 months ago, Marcus began, his voice steady despite his racing heart, I couldn't even make toast without burning it. I started learning because I needed something to do with my hands when I got home from school every day. Something that would keep my mind busy enough that I wouldn't think about. He paused, glancing around at the 4 faces watching him intently. About how much I dreaded coming here the next morning. The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Tyler shifted uncomfortably, recognizing his own role in Marcus's dread without it being explicitly stated. Jake found himself remembering specific incidents, times when he had laughed at Marcus's expense, moments when he had participated in the casual cruelty that defined their social hierarchy. Alex and Danny exchanged glances, both suddenly aware of how their silent complicity had contributed to Marcus's isolation. Marcus continued, his confidence growing as he spoke. My grandmother noticed that I was spending a lot of time in my room, not wanting to talk about school or anything else. She suggested that we cook together and said it might help me feel better about things. At first, I thought it was just busy work, something to keep me distracted. But then I realized that cooking gave me something I hadn't had in a long time. Control. He picked up a knife and began demonstrating proper grip and technique, his movements fluid and confident in a way that contrasted sharply with his usual tentative demeanor at school. When you're cooking, every decision matters. The temperature, the timing, the proportions, you control all of it. And if you mess up, you can start over. There's always another chance to get it right. Tyler watched Marcus's hands work with the knife, recognizing a level of skill and dedication that commanded respect. He had always prided himself on his athletic abilities, but watching Marcus demonstrate knife work with the precision of a trained chef made him realize that mastery came in many forms. How long did it take you to get that good? He asked, genuine curiosity overriding any impulse toward sarcasm. About 6 weeks of practicing every day after school, Marcus replied, beginning to slice vegetables with smooth, even strokes. My grandmother was patient with me, but she also didn't let me get away with sloppy work. She said if I was going to learn something, I should learn it properly. Jake Morrison leaned forward, drawn by the methodical precision of Marcus's preparation. What made you decide to bring it to school? Wasn't it easier to just pack normal lunches? Marcus paused in his cutting, considering the question. I guess I reached a point where I realized I had 2 choices. I could keep trying to be invisible and hope that would make everything easier, or I could do something that made me feel proud of myself, even if it meant standing out more. The weight of that statement settled over the group. Danny Walsh, who had always followed Tyler's lead without questioning the dynamics of their friendship group, found himself thinking about choices he had made and why he had made them. Weren't you worried about making things worse? He asked quietly. Every single day, Marcus admitted. But I figured that if people were going to notice me anyway, at least this way they'd be noticing something I was good at instead of just seeing me as an easy target. Alex Chen nodded slowly, understanding something about vulnerability and courage that he had never considered before. His parents had always emphasized achievement and success, but they had never talked about the kind of bravery it took to pursue excellence in the face of potential ridicule. "That's actually a pretty smart strategy," he said, surprising himself with the admission. Marcus smiled slightly, the first genuinely relaxed expression Tyler had ever seen on his face. "My grandmother calls it weaponizing your talents. She says that when people try to make you feel small, the best response is to show them how big you actually are." As Marcus began demonstrating the basics of rice preparation, something shifted in the group dynamic. Tyler found himself asking detailed questions about technique, his competitive nature channeling itself into genuine desire to master the skills Marcus was teaching. Jake's appreciation for quality and craftsmanship found a new outlet as he examined the tools Marcus used and learned about their specific purposes. Alex's strategic mindset engaged with the planning and timing required for complex meal preparation. Danny discovered that his pattern recognition skills, usually applied to video games and sports, translated perfectly to understanding cooking sequences and ingredient combinations. But as the lesson progressed, deeper revelations began to emerge. Tyler, while attempting to properly grip a knife, mentioned that his aggressive behavior at school stemmed from pressure he felt at home to maintain an image of strength and leadership that he wasn't sure he actually possessed. His parents expected him to excel at everything without effort, and admitting struggle or vulnerability was viewed as weakness in his household. Jake revealed that his obsession with expensive items and social status came from a fear of not measuring up to his older brothers, both of whom had achieved significant success in high school sports and academics. He used material possessions and social dominance as armor against the constant feeling that he was disappointing his family's expectations. Alex shared that his participation in the bullying had been driven by a desperate need to fit in with a group that seemed confident and established. As the child of immigrant parents who sacrificed everything for his opportunities, he felt enormous pressure to succeed socially as well as academically, even if it meant compromising his own values. Danny admitted that he had never really thought about the impact of their actions on Marcus or anyone else. He had been so focused on maintaining his position within Tyler's circle that he had stopped considering whether their behavior aligned with his own sense of right and wrong. Marcus listened to each confession with a mixture of surprise and understanding. The boys who had made his life miserable for months were revealing themselves to be complex individuals dealing with their own struggles and insecurities. It didn't excuse their behavior, but it provided context that made them seem human rather than simply antagonistic forces in his life. As they worked together to prepare a simple but elegant meal, the conversation deepened beyond surface-level admissions. Tyler talked about the exhaustion of constantly maintaining a tough exterior, about how lonely it could be to feel like you couldn't show weakness or uncertainty without losing respect. Jake described the pressure of keeping up appearances when his family was actually struggling financially, despite their efforts to project success. Alex revealed his fear that his parents' sacrifices would be wasted if he failed to achieve the level of success they expected. Danny spoke about his confusion over how their friend group had evolved from genuine camaraderie into something more toxic and controlling. Marcus found himself sharing details about his own struggles that went beyond the bullying he had experienced at school. He talked about his grandfather's death and how it had affected his entire family, about the financial stress that had led to his grandmother moving in with them, about his parents' concerns that he was too sensitive and needed to toughen up to survive in the world. The cooking lesson became a form of therapy, with the shared activity providing a safe framework for honest conversation. Each boy discovered that his assumptions about the others had been incomplete at best and completely wrong at worst. Tyler learned that Marcus's quiet demeanor masked not weakness, but thoughtfulness and determination. Marcus realized that Tyler's aggression was a defense mechanism, rather than genuine malice. As the afternoon progressed and their simple meal took shape, The 5 boys began to see each other as individuals rather than archetypes. The rigid social hierarchy that had defined their interactions dissolved in the face of genuine, human connection and shared vulnerability. The rice turned out perfectly, each grain distinct and properly seasoned. The vegetables retained their vibrant colors and crisp textures. The simple sauce Marcus had taught them to make brought all the flavors together in a way that none of them had expected from such basic ingredients. But more importantly, the barriers that had separated them for months had begun to crumble. They had shared not just a meal preparation experience, but also a level of honesty and mutual respect that none of them had experienced in their friendships before. As they cleaned up the workstation and prepared to leave, Tyler looked at Marcus with an expression that held no trace of the superiority or aggression that had characterized their previous interactions. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, his tone holding a note of hope that surprised them all. Marcus nodded, feeling a cautious optimism that he hadn't dared to experience in months. The other 3 boys echoed Tyler's sentiment, each expressing genuine interest in continuing both the cooking lessons and the deeper conversations that had emerged from them. They left the home economics classroom that evening as 5 individuals who had begun to understand each other in ways that transcended their previous roles as bully and victim. The transformation was far from complete, but the foundation had been laid for something entirely different from the toxic dynamic that had defined their relationships. The walk to the school's exit was filled with animated discussion about recipes they wanted to try, techniques they wanted to master, and ingredients they had never heard of before. For the first time since the beginning of the school year, Marcus felt like he belonged somewhere, while Tyler and his friends began to understand that true strength might come from vulnerability and genuine connection rather than dominance and intimidation. The second week of their after-school cooking sessions brought unexpected challenges that tested the fragile bonds forming between the 5 boys. Marcus had arrived at the home economics classroom on Wednesday to find Tyler sitting alone at one of the workstations, his usually perfect hair disheveled and his eyes red-rimmed in a way that suggested he had been crying. Marcus hesitated at the doorway, uncertain whether Tyler wanted company or solitude. In their previous dynamic, this would have been a moment for Marcus to quietly retreat, avoiding any situation that might provoke confrontation. But their recent conversations had shifted something fundamental in how they related to each other, and Marcus found himself walking toward Tyler instead of away. "The others coming?" Marcus asked quietly, setting down his ingredient bag and beginning his usual setup routine. Tyler shook his head without looking up. "Told them I had basketball practice. Didn't want them to see me like this." The admission revealed more than Tyler probably intended. For months, he had been the unshakable leader of their group, the one who set the tone and maintained their social position through unwavering confidence. Admitting to emotional vulnerability, even to Marcus, represented a significant shift in how he viewed their evolving relationship. Marcus continued his preparation in companionable silence, giving Tyler space to decide whether he wanted to share what was troubling him. This patient approach was something he had learned from his grandmother, who had a gift for creating environments where people felt safe enough to open up about their struggles. "My parents are getting divorced," Tyler said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad moved out last weekend. Mom pretends like everything's fine, but she's been crying in her room every night since he left." Marcus's hands stilled over the vegetables he had been arranging. He had never heard Tyler speak with such raw honesty, and the pain in his voice was unmistakable. "I'm sorry," Marcus said simply, recognizing that platitudes would be inadequate for something this profound. Tyler laughed bitterly. "The worst part is that I'm actually relieved. They've been fighting for years, and now I don't have to listen to them screaming at each other every night. But I also feel guilty for being relieved, and angry that they waited so long to do something about it, and scared about what happens next." The complexity of Tyler's emotions resonated with Marcus in unexpected ways. When his grandfather had died, he had experienced a similar tangle of conflicting feelings, grief mixed with relief that his suffering had ended, guilt about feeling relieved, and anger at being left to navigate the complicated aftermath of loss. When my grandfather was sick, Marcus said, beginning to prepare ingredients for what he had planned as a simple pasta dish, I used to sometimes wish it would just be over. Not because I wanted him to die, but because watching him suffer was so hard. Then when he actually did die, I felt terrible for having those thoughts. Tyler looked up for the first time since Marcus had arrived, recognizing in Marcus's confession a level of understanding that his other friends, despite their loyalty, couldn't provide. None of them had experienced the kind of family upheaval that redefined everything you thought you knew about stability and security. Do you still feel guilty about it? Tyler asked. Marcus considered the question while he began heating oil in a large pan, sometimes. But my grandmother helped me understand that having complicated feelings about difficult situations doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you human. As they worked together to prepare the meal, Tyler began sharing details about his family situation that he had never voiced to anyone. His father's increasing absence from family activities over the past year, the way his parents had stopped communicating except through arguments, his confusion about which parent to support when both seemed miserable but unwilling to change their situation. Marcus listened while demonstrating techniques for making fresh pasta from scratch, a skill his grandmother had taught him during one of their longest and most meaningful cooking sessions. The rhythmic kneading of dough provided a meditative backdrop for Tyler's emotional revelations, and the repetitive motion seemed to help him process feelings he had been suppressing for months. The hardest part, Tyler said, working the pasta dough with more force than strictly necessary, is that I built my whole identity around being the strong one, the leader, the guy who has everything figured out. But I don't have anything figured out. I'm just as lost and scared as everyone else. This admission struck at the core of what had made Tyler such an intimidating figure at school. His confidence, which had seemed unshakable to his peers, was revealed to be a carefully constructed facade designed to hide his own uncertainty and fear. Marcus understood this kind of performance intimately, having spent years trying to make himself invisible to avoid drawing attention to his own vulnerabilities. Maybe being strong doesn't mean having everything figured out, Marcus suggested, cutting the pasta dough into long, thin strips with practiced precision. Maybe it means being honest about not having the answers but still trying to do the right thing anyway. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Jake Morrison, who appeared in the doorway looking uncharacteristically subdued. He surveyed the scene, Tyler's obvious emotional distress and Marcus's gentle presence, and seemed to make a decision about whether to intrude or retreat. My mom lost her job today, Jake announced without preamble, walking directly to the workstation where Marcus and Tyler were working. The company she's worked for since I was 8 just eliminated her entire department. The weight of Jake's announcement settled over the 3 boys like a heavy blanket. Marcus had suspected that Jake's family might be dealing with financial stress, given some comments he had made during their previous sessions, but this confirmation brought the reality into sharp focus. Tyler, still processing his own family crisis, found himself in the unfamiliar position of offering support rather than demanding it. That's terrible, man. What's she going to do? Jake picked up a kitchen towel and began helping with the pasta preparation, his movements jerky with suppressed anxiety. She's trying to stay positive, talking about new opportunities and fresh starts, but I can see how scared she is. Dad's been working double shifts for months, just to keep up with our mortgage, and now... He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence that would acknowledge just how precarious his family situation had become. Marcus recognized the shame in Jake's posture, the way he avoided eye contact while discussing his family struggles. It was the same shame Marcus had felt when his own family's financial difficulties had become apparent to his classmates through subtle signs. The same lunch every day, clothes that fit poorly or showed signs of wear, the inability to participate in activities that required fees or equipment. "Is there anything we can do to help?" Marcus asked, his voice gentle but sincere. The question seemed to surprise Jake, who looked up with an expression that suggested he had never considered that his friends might want to actively support him rather than simply tolerate his problems. In their previous group dynamic, personal struggles were viewed as weaknesses to be hidden rather than challenges to be shared and addressed collectively. Alex, Chun and Danny Walsh arrived together 20 minutes later, each carrying their own emotional burdens that became apparent as the evening progressed. Alex had received a letter from his parents' immigration lawyer explaining complications in his grandparents' visa applications that might prevent them from visiting for several more years. Danny had learned that his parents were considering a job transfer that would require the family to move across the country before the end of the school year. The cooking session that evening became something none of them had anticipated, a support group disguised as a culinary lesson. As they worked together to prepare a meal that was more elaborate than anything they had attempted before, each boy found himself sharing fears and uncertainties that he had never voiced to anyone. Marcus discovered that his role in the group had evolved from victim to facilitator, using the skills his grandmother had taught him about creating safe spaces for difficult conversations. He guided them through both the technical aspects of cooking and the emotional process of vulnerability, helping each of them find ways to express feelings they had been taught to suppress. Tyler revealed that his aggressive behavior at school had been a way of exerting control in an environment where he felt powerless, compensating for the chaos in his home life by dominating social situations at school. Jake admitted that his materialistic tendencies stemmed from a desperate need to project financial stability his family didn't actually possess. Alex shared his fear that his academic achievements might not be enough to justify his parents' sacrifices if he couldn't also achieve the social success they expected. Danny confessed that his tendency to follow rather than lead came from a deep-seated fear of making decisions that might disappoint the people he cared about. As they cooked together, sharing ingredients and techniques while also sharing their deepest concerns, something remarkable happened. The meal they created was the best any of them had ever prepared, despite, or perhaps because of, the emotional intensity of their conversation. The pasta was perfectly al dente, the sauce balanced and flavorful, the vegetables retaining their vibrant colors and crisp textures. But more importantly, the 5 boys had created something even more valuable than an excellent meal. They had built a foundation of trust and mutual support that transcended their previous roles and expectations. Tyler had experienced what it felt like to be vulnerable without being rejected or diminished. Jake had learned that admitting financial stress didn't make him less worthy of friendship. Alex had discovered that his friends valued his authentic self more than his achievements. Danny had found his voice and opinions respected even when they differed from the group consensus. Marcus had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all. The quiet, isolated boy who had been their victim had become their emotional anchor, the person they turned to for understanding and support. His grandfather's death and his family's struggles had given him a maturity and empathy that his peers were just beginning to develop. As they sat together sharing the meal they had prepared, the conversation turned from individual struggles to collective problem-solving. Tyler proposed using his extensive network of family friends to help Jake's mother find job opportunities. Jake offered to share cost-cutting strategies his family had developed to help others manage financial stress. Alex suggested pooling their resources to help each other with various challenges. Danny volunteered to research scholarship opportunities and support programs that might benefit their families. The evening ended with 5 boys who had arrived, carrying individual burdens but left feeling supported by a community they had created together. They made plans to meet the following day, not just for cooking but for what they had begun calling their kitchen table talks, sessions where they could continue processing their challenges while developing their culinary skills. Walking out of the school that evening, each boy carried with him a new understanding of what friendship could look like when built on genuine care and mutual support rather than social hierarchy and shared cruelty. They had discovered that vulnerability, rather than being a weakness to be exploited, could be a strength that deepened connections and created unbreakable bonds between people willing to trust each other with their authentic selves. The transformation from bullies and victims to genuine friends was accelerating, driven by their shared recognition that everyone was fighting battles that others couldn't see, and that compassion and understanding were more powerful tools for navigating adolescence than aggression and intimidation had ever been. The transformation happening within their small group had not gone unnoticed by the broader Roosevelt Middle School community. What began as whispered observations in hallways had evolved into full-scale speculation about the unlikely alliance between Marcus Thompson and Tyler Rodriguez's crew. Students, teachers, and parents were all trying to make sense of a social shift that defied every established pattern of middle school hierarchy. Sarah Williams, a 7th grade student who served as the unofficial documentarian of school social dynamics through her popular Instagram account, had been among the first to notice the change. Her initial post about the weird lunch table situation had garnered modest attention, but as the unusual friendship continued to develop, her updates began attracting followers from other schools who were fascinated by what she termed the Great Roosevelt Social Experiment. The cafeteria had become an unexpected theater for this social transformation. Where Marcus had once sat alone with his elaborate lunches, now 5 boys gathered daily around what other students had begun calling the cooking table. Marcus continued to bring his impressive meals, but now Tyler, Jake, Alex, and Danny contributed dishes they had learned to prepare during their after-school sessions. The visual impact was striking. Tyler Rodriguez, who had once commanded attention through intimidation and athletic prowess, now engaged in animated discussions about flavor profiles and cooking techniques. Jake Morrison, previously known for his expensive clothes and dismissive attitude toward academic pursuits, could be seen taking careful notes about ingredient substitutions and preparation methods. Alex Chun and Danny Walsh, former silent enforcers in Tyler's social regime, had become enthusiastic participants in what looked like an ongoing culinary seminar. Mrs. Patricia Henderson, the home economics teacher who had been unknowingly facilitating their after-school sessions, was the first adult to recognize the significance of what was happening. She had arrived at school early one Thursday morning to discover the classroom meticulously cleaned and organized, with a thank you note and a container of homemade cookies waiting on her desk. The note, written in Marcus's careful handwriting but signed by all 5 boys, expressed gratitude for the use of the classroom and explained how their cooking sessions had become a central part of their friendship. Mrs. Henderson, who had taught at Roosevelt for 15 years and witnessed countless social dramas, recognized this as something genuinely unprecedented in her experience. She brought the note to the attention of Principal Robert Martinez during their weekly faculty meeting, sparking a discussion about the educational and social implications of what the boys had created. The administration had been monitoring the situation cautiously, aware that any intervention might disrupt a positive development that was having ripple effects throughout the school community. The first major test of public perception came during the school's monthly parent-teacher conference night. Tyler's mother, Linda Rodriguez, arrived at the school expecting to discuss her son's declining academic performance and recent behavioral issues. Instead, she found herself in conversation with Mrs. Henderson about Tyler's leadership role in what the teacher described as the most positive peer mentoring program I've ever witnessed. Linda Rodriguez had been dealing with her own emotional turmoil following her separation from Tyler's father, and she had feared that the family crisis was manifesting in problematic behavior at school. Learning that Tyler had channeled his leadership abilities into something constructive rather than destructive came as an enormous relief. "He talks about Marcus constantly," she confided to Mrs. Henderson. "At first, I was worried because I knew there had been some conflict between them earlier in the year. But now he comes home excited about recipes they're planning to try and techniques Marcus is teaching them. It's like he's discovered a completely new part of himself." Similar conversations were happening throughout the school that evening. Jake Morrison's parents, David and Carol Morrison, learned from multiple teachers that their son had become an advocate for students facing financial difficulties, using his own family's recent struggles to connect with and support classmates. In similar situations, Alex Chung's parents discovered that their son had started an informal tutoring network, helping students with academic challenges while learning cooking skills that connected him to his cultural heritage in new ways. Danny Walsh's parents were amazed to hear that their typically follower-oriented son had begun showing initiative and leadership qualities they had never seen before. The parent-teacher conferences sparked a wave of community interest that extended beyond the immediate families involved. Parents began sharing stories on social media about the positive changes they were observing in their children's attitudes toward friendship, conflict resolution, and collaborative problem-solving. Rebecca Thompson, Marcus's mother, found herself at the center of attention in ways that initially made her uncomfortable. She had spent months worrying about her son's social isolation and the impact of bullying on his emotional well-being. The sudden transformation of his tormentors into genuine friends seemed almost too good to be true, and she remained cautiously optimistic while monitoring the situation for signs that it might be temporary or superficial. The breakthrough came when Tyler Rodriguez appeared at their front door on a Saturday morning, carrying a bouquet of flowers and a handwritten letter requesting permission to spend the afternoon learning bread-making techniques from Marcus's grandmother. The formality of his approach and the genuine respect he showed for family traditions convinced Rebecca that the change in these boys was authentic and profound. Marcus's grandmother, Alina Santos, became an unexpected celebrity within the extended school community. Word spread about her role in facilitating the boys' cooking education, and she began receiving requests from other families interested in learning traditional recipes and techniques. She embraced this new role with characteristic grace, organizing weekend workshops that brought together students and parents in cross-cultural culinary exchanges. The success of these community cooking sessions caught the attention of local media outlets. Maria Gonzalez, a reporter for the Amarillo Tribune who specialized in human interest stories, attended one of Elena's workshops and was struck by the fine intergenerational and multicultural connections being fostered through shared cooking experiences. Her article, titled "From Bullies to Best Friends: How Cooking Transformed a Middle School Social Dynamic," was picked up by regional news networks and shared widely on social media platforms. The story resonated with parents and educators across the country who were struggling with similar issues of bullying, social hierarchy, and peer conflict in their own communities. The media attention brought unexpected challenges along with recognition. The 5 boys found themselves dealing with interview requests, social media followers, and the pressure of representing a positive model for conflict resolution that others wanted to replicate. Marcus, who had spent years trying to avoid attention, was particularly overwhelmed by the sudden spotlight on his personal transformation. The group made a collective decision to handle media attention carefully, agreeing to participate only in opportunities that might help other students facing similar challenges. They collaborated on a presentation for the district's anti-bullying initiative, sharing their story in age-appropriate ways that emphasized the importance of genuine communication, shared interests, and mutual support in resolving peer conflicts. Presentation to a gathering of middle school counselors and administrators from across the region was met with standing ovations and requests for follow-up consultations. Educational professionals were particularly interested in the role that structured, collaborative activities had played in breaking down social barriers and facilitating authentic relationship building. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a child psychologist who attended their presentation, was struck by the boys' sophisticated understanding of their own emotional development and conflict resolution processes. She noted that they had essentially created their own form of group therapy, using cooking as a vehicle for developing empathy, communication skills, and emotional intelligence. The academic community's interest led to invitations for the boys to participate in research studies about peer relationships and bullying intervention strategies. While they were honored by the recognition, they remained focused on the practical aspects of maintaining their friendships and continuing to support each other through ongoing challenges. The response from their immediate peer group was more complex. Some students were genuinely inspired by the transformation and began seeking out their own opportunities for cross-social group connections. Others remained skeptical, viewing the change as temporary or performative rather than authentic. A few students who had been excluded from Tyler's previous social circle expressed resentment about his newfound popularity based on reformed behavior. Marcus found himself in the unusual position of mediating between different groups of students who wanted to understand or replicate what had happened between him and his former bullies. He discovered that leadership came naturally to him when it was based on helping others rather than competing for social status. The 5 boys made a conscious decision to use their unexpected platform to address broader issues of social inclusion and peer support within their school community. They organized lunch table rotations that brought together students from different social groups, facilitated conflict resolution conversations for classmates experiencing peer difficulties, and mentored younger students who were struggling with social integration. Their efforts created a ripple effect that transformed the social atmosphere at Roosevelt Middle School. Students began approaching peer conflicts with more maturity and empathy. Teachers reported improved classroom dynamics and reduced disciplinary issues, and parents noted positive changes in their children's attitudes toward diversity and inclusion. Community response extended beyond the school environment. Local restaurants began hosting team cooking classes inspired by the boys' example. The public library organized intergenerational cooking workshops that brought together teenagers and senior citizens. Community centers developed conflict resolution programs based on collaborative activities that required participants to work together toward shared goals. The mayor of their town, Robert Chun, proclaimed a Friendship Through Understanding Week that celebrated the boys' achievement while encouraging other young people to find creative solutions to social conflicts. The proclamation mentioned specifically how their example had inspired community-wide conversations about empathy, cultural exchange, and the power of shared interests to bridge social divides. As the attention continued to grow, the 5 friends remained grounded in the simple reality that had started their transformation, the recognition that everyone was dealing with challenges that others couldn't see, and that genuine friendship required vulnerability, patience, and mutual support. They had accidentally become symbols of positive change, but they were determined to remain authentic to the relationships they had built rather than the public image others projected onto them. The community response had validated what they had discovered through their own experience, that meaningful change was possible when people were willing to look beyond surface differences and connect through shared humanity. Their story had resonated with so many people precisely because it demonstrated that transformation was within reach for anyone willing to approach conflict with curiosity rather than defensiveness, and connection rather than competition. 1 year later, the Roosevelt Middle School cafeteria bore little resemblance to the socially stratified environment it had been when Marcus Thompson first brought his elaborate lunch to school. The transformation that had begun with 5 boys around a single table had evolved into a comprehensive cultural shift that redefined how students approached friendship, conflict, and community building. Marcus stood at the front of the school auditorium, adjusting the microphone before addressing an audience of students, parents, educators, and community leaders who had gathered for Roosevelt's first annual Bridges Not Barriers celebration. The confident young man speaking to the crowd would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had known the isolated, frightened boy from 18 months earlier. "When I first started bringing different lunches to school," Marcus began, his voice clear and steady, "I never imagined it would lead to anything like this. I was just trying to find a way to feel proud of myself instead of ashamed of who I was." The audience, which included students from 12 different school districts who had traveled to learn about Roosevelt's peer mediation program, listened with rapt attention as Marcus continued his opening remarks for the celebration that had become an annual tradition, honoring student-led initiatives for social change. Tyler Rodriguez, now serving as student body president, watched from the side of the stage with unconcealed pride. His leadership style had evolved dramatically from the intimidation-based approach he had used as a 7th grader. His campaign platform had focused on inclusion, mental health support, and creating opportunities for students to discover and share their unique talents with the broader school community. The auditorium itself showcased the breadth of changes that had taken place at Roosevelt. Student artwork covered the walls, representing collaborative projects between former adversaries who had found common ground through shared creative interests. A display near the entrance featured photographs from monthly community dinners where students cooked alongside senior citizens, recent immigrants, and families experiencing financial hardship. Jake Morrison, who had graduated from Roosevelt the previous spring and was now attending the local Culinary Arts Institute on a scholarship funded by community donations, returned to school that day to participate in a panel discussion about turning personal struggles into opportunities for growth. His family's financial crisis had ultimately led him to discover a passion for food, service management, and a talent for creating systems that made high-quality meals accessible to people with limited resources. "The thing I learned," Jake told the audience during his panel presentation, "is that admitting you need help isn't a sign of weakness. It's actually the first step toward finding solutions you never could have discovered on your own." Alex Chun had channeled his academic achievements and cultural heritage into founding Roosevelt's first international student exchange program, which had facilitated homestay relationships between local families and students from around the world. His own family's immigration experience had given him unique insights into the challenges of cultural adaptation, and he had created support networks that helped newcomers integrate successfully into the school community, while sharing their own traditions and perspectives. Danny Walsh, whose family had indeed moved across the country the previous year, maintained his connection to the Roosevelt community through virtual participation in ongoing projects and regular visits during school breaks. His relocation had initially threatened to disrupt the tight bonds the 5 friends had formed, but they had adapted by creating digital cooking sessions and online support meetings that actually strengthened their relationships while demonstrating that genuine friendship could transcend geographic distance. The celebration that day featured presentations from students who had been inspired by the original group's example to create their own bridge-building initiatives. A group of 6th graders had established a peer tutoring network that paired struggling students with classmates who excelled in specific subjects, creating academic support relationships that often evolved into lasting friendships. 8th grade students had organized a community garden project that brought together families from different economic backgrounds to grow fresh produce while sharing gardening knowledge and cultural food traditions. Perhaps most significantly, Roosevelt's administration had formally adopted peer mediation protocols, developed by student committees and based on the principles the 5 friends had discovered through their own conflict resolution process. Students trained in these techniques were helping classmates navigate disputes through structured conversations that emphasized understanding rather than winning. Collaboration rather than competition. Mrs. Patricia Henderson, now serving as Roosevelt's Director of Student Life, had documented the measurable impacts of these cultural changes. Disciplinary referrals had decreased by 65% over the past year. Academic performance had improved across all grade levels, with particular gains among students who had previously struggled with social integration. Parent satisfaction surveys indicated unprecedented levels of confidence in the school's ability to provide not just academic education, but also emotional and social development support. The success at Roosevelt had attracted attention from educational researchers who were studying the replicability of student-led social change initiatives. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had continued following the boys' development, had published a research paper documenting how their approach to conflict resolution had created lasting changes in school culture that extended far beyond the original participants. What makes this case study unique, Dr. Walsh explained to the celebration audience, is that the transformation was driven by students themselves rather than imposed by adult authorities. The authenticity of peer-to-peer connection created change that was both deeper and more sustainable than traditional anti-bullying interventions. Marcus's grandmother, Alina Santos, had become something of a local celebrity through her role in facilitating intergenerational cooking workshops that now took place in community centers throughout the region. Her approach to teaching had inspired similar programs in neighboring towns, and she frequently traveled to share her methods with other communities struggling with social division and youth conflict. Food is a universal language, Elena told the audience during her featured presentation. When people cook together, they learn to trust each other. When they share meals, they remember their common humanity. These boys taught me that sometimes the most powerful changes come from the simplest acts of kindness and courage. The celebration included a cooking demonstration where Marcus, Tyler, Jake, Alex, and Danny recreated the first meal they had prepared together in the home economics classroom 18 months earlier. The simple pasta dish had become symbolic of their transformation, and they had prepared it countless times for community events, cooking classes, and media demonstrations. As they worked together at the demonstration kitchen that had been set up on the auditorium stage, the ease and affection of their friendship was apparent to everyone watching. They moved with the coordinated efficiency of people who had spent countless hours collaborating, finishing each other's sentences, and anticipating each other's needs with the fluidity that comes from genuine partnership. The recipe never changes, Tyler explained to the audience as he demonstrated proper knife technique. But every time we make it, we discover something new about working together or supporting each other through whatever challenges we're facing. The audience of students watching the demonstration included several groups who had traveled from schools dealing with their own bullying and social hierarchy issues. Many had implemented pilot programs based on Roosevelt's model, with varying degrees of success that seemed to correlate with the level of authentic student leadership involvement rather than adult-imposed programming. The celebration concluded with the announcement of Roosevelt's newest initiative, a summer program that would bring together middle school students from different communities to participate in collaborative projects designed to build cross-cultural understanding and conflict resolution skills. The program had received funding from local businesses, educational foundations, and individual donors who had been inspired by the boys' story and wanted to support similar transformations in other communities. Marcus, Tyler, Jake, Alex, and Danny had been selected as the program's inaugural peer mentors, responsible for training other young people in the communication and collaboration techniques they had developed through their own experience. The opportunity represented both recognition of how far they had come and a chance to help other students discover that positive change was possible, even in the most challenging social situations. As the celebration wound down and participants began making their way to the reception in the school cafeteria, the five friends found themselves alone on the auditorium stage for a few quiet moments. They stood looking out at the empty seats where hundreds of people had just witnessed presentations about transformation, resilience, and the power of authentic human connection. Do you ever think about how different things would be if you hadn't started bringing those lunches to school? Tyler asked Marcus, his tone reflective rather than sentimental. Marcus considered the question seriously. I think about it sometimes, but not in a way that makes me wish things had been different. Everything that happened, the bullying, the loneliness, even the fear, it all led to this. To us figuring out how to be real friends instead of just people trying to survive middle school. Danny, participating in the conversation through video call on Jake's phone, nodded in agreement. Plus, if we hadn't gone through all that difficult stuff, we wouldn't have learned how to help other kids who are dealing with similar problems. Our experience only matters because we can use it to make things better for other people. Alex smiled, thinking about the international students he had worked with over the past year and how their diverse perspectives had enriched not only his own understanding, but the entire school community. I've learned that the things that make us different from each other are actually the things that make us stronger together. But you can only discover that if you're willing to be vulnerable enough to share what makes you unique. Jake, despite being present only through technology, remained an integral part of their ongoing friendship and collaborative work. His relocation had taught them all valuable lessons about maintaining connection across distance and including people who couldn't always be physically present in their projects and decision-making processes. The best part, Jake added, is that we're not the same people we were when this started, but we're also not trying to be anyone other than who we actually are. We just figured out how to be our authentic selves in a way that brings out the best in each other instead of the worst. As they walked together toward the cafeteria reception, passing walls covered with photographs documenting their community's transformation over the past year, the five friends reflected on how their individual smart move, Marcus's decision to channel his pain into something creative and impressive, had evolved into a collective commitment to making their community a place where everyone could discover and share their unique gifts. The cafeteria reception was buzzing with animated conversations between students, parents, and educators who were making plans to implement similar initiatives in their own communities. Marcus found himself at the center of multiple conversations, offering advice and encouragement to students who were dealing with their own social challenges while also learning from their experiences and perspectives. The evening ended with an impromptu cooking session in the home economics classroom, where visiting students worked alongside Roosevelt peers to prepare a collaborative meal using recipes from different cultural traditions. The kitchen that had once been the secret gathering place for five unlikely friends had become a symbol of how shared activities could transform relationships and build community across any divide. As Marcus looked around the bustling classroom, filled with students from different schools, backgrounds, and social groups working together with enthusiasm and mutual respect, he realized that their story had become something much larger than any of them had imagined. What had started as one boy's desperate attempt to feel proud of himself had evolved into a movement that was helping young people everywhere discover that friendship, understanding, and positive change were always possible for anyone brave enough to take the first step toward authentic connection with others, the smart move that had transformed Marcus's tormentors into his best friends had become a blueprint for transformation that was spreading far beyond the walls of Roosevelt Middle School, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with the simplest acts of courage and the willingness to believe that people can grow, change, and become better versions of themselves when given the opportunity and support to do so. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.